You can shoot me with your words, you can cut me with your lies, you can kill me with your hatefulness, but just like life, I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain, I rise. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise.
You've just heard those words. I rise, I rise, I rise. 3 words, 9 stanzas, and one woman who refused completely, deliberately, repeatedly to stay down. More than 40 years after it published, Maya Angelou's Still I Rise still continues to be one of the most quoted poems in the world. But what makes it so powerful? Why do people from completely different backgrounds continue to connect with it? And how can the same poem mean something slightly different every time someone reads it? And today, we're going to explore Still I Rise through 4 perspectives. The woman who wrote it, the world she was writing into, the language she chose, and the readers who continue to give it new life. Before we talk about Maya Angelou herself, let's spend a moment with the poem. Still I Rise was published in 1978 as part of Angelou's poetry collection, and Still I Rise. The poem is made up of 9 stanzas, and throughout the entire poem, the speaker addresses a mysterious you. This you is never clearly identified. It could be a person, it could be a society, it could be a system. And what matters is that this you keeps trying to push the speaker down again and again. The speaker responds in the same way, not by denying the struggle, but by rising above it. Each stanza adds another layer of resistance until the poem reaches its unforgettable ending. I rise, I rise, I rise. To understand where this voice comes from, we need to understand Maya Angelou. Angelou was born in 1928 and grew up in the American South during a time of racial segregation. From an early age, she experienced both racism and personal hardship. One of the most significant events in her childhood happened when she was 8 years old. After experiencing sexual violence and testifying in court, Angelou believed that her words may cause harm to someone else, and because of that belief, she stopped speaking completely for nearly 5 years. Imagine that for a moment. A future writer, a future poet, someone who would one day become famous for her voice, choosing silence. During those years, books became her companions. Literature became a place where she could listen, learn, and slowly rebuild her relationship with language. Years later, when she writes,
You can shoot me with your words, you can cut me with your lies.
those words carry extra weight. She understood the power of language, not only to hurt, but also to heal. But Angelou's experiences cannot be understood through a single lens. She was navigating both race and gender at the same time. As a black woman in America, many of the challenges she faced were shaped by the intersection of those identities. Expectations were often placed on who could speak, who they could speak, and how confidently they were allowed to exist in public spaces. Yet Angelou refused to make herself smaller. Instead, she embraced her voice. She became a writer, performer, speaker, and activist. And that confidence appears throughout Still I Rise. Listen to a line like,
Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Just because I walk as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room.
The speaker isn't apologizing. She isn't asking for approval. She's challenging the assumption that confidence should be something to hide. By the time we reach this poem, Angelou's voice is no longer silent. It is strong, it is deliberate, and it is impossible to ignore. But voices never exist in isolation. They are shaped by the world around them. So, before we look closely at the poem's language, we need to understand the word that helped shape it. By this point, we know something about the woman behind the poem, but still I Rise is not only about one person's story, it is also connected to a much larger story. When Angelou writes,
Out of the huts of history's shame I rise.
she's reaching beyond her own experiences. The land carries echoes of generations who experienced slavery, racism, exclusion, and survival. So far, we've been looking at the world around the poem, the story behind it, the experiences behind it, and the cultural forces that shaped it. But those influences don't stay outside the text. They become part of the poem's language. And if we want to understand why this poem feels so powerful, we need to look closely at the words Angelou chose. Okay, let's start with diction. The specific words Angelou chooses. Some of the poem's most interesting ideas are hidden inside single words. Take the word.
Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Just because I walk as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room.
It might sound playful, but historically, it was often used to criticize confidence, especially in black women. Angelou takes that word and turns it into questions. Notice what she doesn't do. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't defend herself. Instead, she challenges the listener. Then there is another word. Beside means troubled, surrounded, or burdened. It is a subtle shift, but powerful. No, the speaker isn't the one weighed down. The oppressor is the one disturbed by someone else's freedom. One of my favorite words in the entire poem appears near the end. It is easy to miss. The word is wondrously. Angelou writes,
I rise into a daybreak miraculously clear. I rise.
Not finally clear, not perfectly clear, but wondrously clear. Wonder suggests surprise. It suggests something beautiful you didn't fully expect. And that tiny word changes the tone of the ending. It reminds us that the future was never guaranteed. The speaker rises anyway. Angelou's power isn't only found in individual words. It's also found in repetition. Look at these lines.
You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I'll rise.
The phrase "you may" appears again and again, and that's important because the speaker isn't pretending harm doesn't exist. She acknowledges it. She allows it to be named. She allows it to be seen. And only then does she rise beyond it, which makes the ending even more powerful. I rise, I rise, I rise. By the time we hear those final words, they feel earned. Not because nothing happened, but because so much did. We've looked at the word behind the poem, and we've looked add the language inside it, but poems aren't complete until someone reads them, and that's where things become personal. One of the most interesting choices Angelou makes is never telling us exactly who you is. Throughout the poem, she keeps speaking to this unnamed figure, but she never identifies them, and because of that, every reader fills the gap differently. For some readers, you represent racism. For others, it represents a specific person. For others, it might be society, expectation, and limitation. But for some readers, the most powerful interpretation is even closer to home. Maybe you is an inner voice, the voice that repeats every thought you've ever absorbed from other people, the voice that tells you to stay small. The poem leaves that space open, and that's part of its power. This is where reading becomes personal. Two people can read the same poem and walk away with completely different experiences. Someone who has faced discrimination might connect with one part. Someone recovering from failure might connect with another. Someone rebuilding confidence might hear something entirely different. The words stay the same, but the reader changes. And because of the reader changes, the meaning expands. This is also why poetry behaves differently from other forms of writing. There is no single fixed interpretation. Instead, meaning is created in the space between the text and the reader, and that space changes depending on experience. Someone reading this poem at 16 may not fully understand its weight, but the person, years later, after experiencing loss, rejection, or growth, may suddenly see the poem differently. Not because the poem changed, but because they did. And that is what makes Still I Rise timeless. It grows with the reader, it moves with the reader, and in many ways, it rises with the reader too. But maybe the real reason this poem still stays with us is not just because it sounds powerful. It's because it feels familiar. Everyone in some way understands what it means to be pushed down. Not always in dramatic ways, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's quiet, a job that stays too long, a failure that lingers in memory, a voice, internal or external, that says you are not enough. And that is where this poem becomes personal. Because Still I Rise doesn't deny any of that. It doesn't pretend the world is fair. It doesn't pretend pain doesn't exist. And it simply insists none of those things get to be the final word. And maybe that's why the repetition matters so much. I rise, I rise, I rise. It is not just a statement. It is a rhythm, a decision, something you return to when everything else feels uncertain. And maybe that is what Maya Angelou really left behind. Not just a poem, but a way of responding to life.